Good evening and welcome to everybody to tonight's planning and control meeting. Before we go any further, can I just ask you all either to switch your mobiles off or put them on silent? Just make sure mine's on silent in case anybody pulls me up on it. Going on to the agenda, well, before I do, actually, this is certainly the last meeting of this year, and it could possibly be the last meeting we have in person due to possibly new rules coming in after the new year. So let's make the most of it. Right, apologies, I have just one from Councillor Matthew Holmes. Anybody else? No? Okay. Late items should be introduced by me. Just one quick one. There's a seminar regarding the sort of birthday of the local plan, as it were. It's going to be held by the sort of our barrister, possibly on January the 11th. It will be on Skype or team meeting and probably about an hour or so. So when you all get that, I suggest you make a note in your diaries and do attend it because it's very informative. Declarations of interest by anybody? Yes.
I'll declare an interest in item 6, item 2 of item 6.
Well, there's only 2 on it.
Yeah, the last one.
You had me confused then when you said item 6. I was going to, I thought I got the wrong agenda. Okay, thank you.
Can I just clarify what the interest is?
Yes.
I've called the item in.
Right. And are you not taking part in the debate and consideration?
As I called it in, I think I have a right to speak.
Right. Okay. And the reason for calling it in was just could you clarify?
I disagree with the reasoning.
Right. Okay. Can you approach the matter with a totally open mind then?
I have visited the site, so whether that prejudices that or not, I don't know. But
you can talk. I mean, it's a question of whether you consider that you can approach this with a completely open mind.
I have attempted to see both sides of the argument, yes.
Okay, so you feel you can do that. Right. Okay, that's right.
Thank you.
Is that okay, Stephen?
It's one thing calling the matter in if you've got concerns but on the matter, which is one thing, but provided you're not predetermined the matter and can approach it with an open mind, you should be okay.
Well, we'll have to rely on your honesty and integrity in that case. But, item 4, minutes of the meeting. Sorry, Councillor Potter.
Thanks, Chair. On the other one of this point, the hairdressing salon, I am an Alistair Ward councillor, but I will approach the matter in an open and unbiased manner. I have been on a site visit there and I have took part in the previous debate. Thank you.
As we all did, Councillor Potter, and the site visit as well. Okay, anybody else? No? Item 4, then, minutes of the meeting held on 18th of November. Somebody like to... yes, seconder? Okay, thank you. Item 5, minutes of the meeting of the Conservation Area Advisory Committee, which was held on the 14th of October. Okay, seconder, thank you. Item 6, which is tonight's applications, and the first one we have is pages 1 to 11, 46 Corn Drive, and I forgot who it is to tell us about. Ian.
Good evening, Chair. Just a few items to update the report with. There were updated representations circulated yesterday, together with a statement from the applicant, which was all circulated by email. I don't propose to read out the statement from the applicant. I take it members will have digested all that information. Councillor Webb is also on the list to speak on this application, and apologies for missing him off the list. And there's a small error in condition 4 on page 8, where the opening hours are extended to 7:30 and not 7, as indicated in that part of the report. I've not got anything really to add to the substance of the report, Chair. I think it really says it all. Members will be familiar with this site at 46 Quorn Drive. I just remind members of the scope of the application. We are looking at an extant planning permission, and we're dealing with conditions 2, 4, 5 and 14, which relate to condition 2, the time limit, which is a temporary time limit. Condition 4 is the opening hours of the salon. 5 is the appointment schedule, and 14 is a side-facing window. And all the conditions, as varied, are proposed in the report on page 8. You've got 3 speakers, Chair, including Councillor Webb, and I'll hand over to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. The first speaker we have is Mr. Burley. Mr. Burley, good evening. You have 3 minutes to state your case.
Okay, your decisions made in July should not be overturned. Condition 2, permission for 1 year. Mrs. Beckett is asking for immediate permission, leaving no chance for further scrutiny. Your planning officer asked whether the business has, so far, operated in a satisfactory manner. It is not satisfactory. Close neighbours are stressed and afraid after verbal threats from the first meeting and being looked at through the front windows of the salon, which continues to intimidate and remove privacy. Your planning officer states that these changes would increase the potential for harm to residential amenity. The proposed variations open the potential for unacceptable harm. Condition 4, restriction of opening hours. A 5 p.m. finish was agreed to protect the amenity of residents. Mrs. Beckett's argument is purely for profit and makes no consideration for the well-being of neighbours. Any change to this condition would put the convenience of her customers above the amenity of residents, who have already had to cope with 48 hours of busyness per week for nearly 2 years. Your planning officer looked for comparison sites and from the whole country found 2 applications. These salons were limited to only 18 and 16 hours per week. Why is the amenity of residents so undervalued in Derby City compared to the rest of England? Condition 5, appointment management. In the planning officer's original report for July, he described the operation as, and I quote, a single hairdresser serving a single customer at any one time. This is clearly not the case and never has been. The salon can and does cater for multiple customers at a time, and now wants to cater for weddings and birthdays. Was the original permission based on 1 customer at a time? The restrictive conditions need to be retained and clarified. Condition 14, side window. Again, your planning officer states, this would increase the potential for harm to residential amenity. Thin plastic film and removing the handle is a last-minute bodge which shows Mrs. Beckett's contempt towards her close neighbour's amenity. Your planning officer states for a 3rd time, these changes would increase the potential for harm to residential amenity. Mrs. Beckett has only provided commercial reasons for these changes, but this is a residential cul-de-sac and not a retail area. People live here and have a right to protection from unreasonable development. In other parts of the country, residents' amenity is protected by their councils. We ask for our council to do the same.
Thank you, Mr. Burley. Well timed there. Next speaker, Mrs. Altaf.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. My amenity is valuable, and the restrictions that were applied to Housing Hair Salon on July the 15th were necessary to protect my amenity and that of the residents. It is imperative that the conditions remain and are not removed. She needed to prove that she could abide by the conditions, minimise disruptions and remain amicable with her neighbours. However, we find that Miss Beckett is not satisfied and wishes to remove the restrictions, add variations and be granted new activities. I am concerned that she wants to use the hours permitted to operate further into the evening. She is already operating the variation hours since July as if they've already been granted. Have they? If not, this must be stopped. I certainly do not want my precious evening hours affected by this salon. I do also work full-time. I'm a parent and a carer, and please consider my needs. Furthermore, hair salons on the high street are not even granted such time privileges. Even the planning officer throughout his report stressed that the hours would significantly harm amenity. Was she unable to accommodate her customers during the day at her previous location? What's the difference now? Please explain. Were they not working then? Mrs. Beckett was permitted 48 hours, well beyond what would be expected in a residential area. She says this is inflexible. Really? Now she wants to do weddings and birthdays. This is an expansion. Most important, such activities would erode my amenity and privacy even more. My argument is supported by the Planning Officer's report that emphasises any changes would cause significant harm to amenity, regardless of recommendations. I have had to tolerate a tremendous amount of disruption in the last 21 months. There does not need to be an extension of time to prove that Mrs. Beckett cannot work till restrictions. Also, taking the handle off the window is not compliance. She could put that handle back on and reopen the window tomorrow, just as she's been doing since July. This is also true of the plastic film she puts on her window. I can still see directly into the salon when I come out of my bedroom and my bathroom. This must be made soundproof and a non-opening window, or it should just be bricked up. I am 2 metres away from them. The temporary permission should not be lifted and must remain in place until July 2022. The variations should not be granted as she cannot work with restrictions and is breaching them. The only reason for removing the temporary permission is so she does not have to be scrutinised or apply for new planning permission without completing a comprehensive sequential test. The Planning Committee, as before, should ensure and protect my amenity and look carefully upon plans that give rise to dispute and prevent this. This is also supported by the Planning Officer in his report.
Thank you, Mrs. Altaf. Again, very good timing. Ian, did you want to come back on any of this?
No, thank you, Chair. I'll let Councillor Webb speak.
Terrible. Right. Councillor Webb.
How could you forget about me, Chair? This is a retrospective planning application, as we all know. All the issues that have been noted could have been carried out if a planning application had been made before work started. Appeal decisions, as has been mentioned, on 2 similar occasions resulted in 1 refusal and 1 granted, limited to 28 hours and subsequently reduced to 16 hours. Issues on both being protection of residential amenity. You will note that this applicant also has an application to appeal to the Planning Inspectorate. Members made a generous decision in granting 48 hours of opening, 9 till 5, Monday to Saturday, on the occasion this was approved. Conditions 2, 4, 5 and 14 were applied amongst others to safeguard residential amenity. Condition 2, the applicant has not yet shown willingness to comply with the current conditions, so granting full permission at this stage without a review would adversely affect residential amenity forever. Condition 4, no customers shall remain on the premises outside the hours of 9 till 5. It was clearly stated in the decision notice in July. This condition continues to be breached despite the applicant's apology. Timed appointments, this was approved to ensure that the activity generated by the business remains compatible with the residential site context. We now are told by the applicant that she is using 2 chairs, which means 2 cars and possibly 2 cars queuing to get into the premises. But may I ask, for the protection of the applicant, that they are advised that the appointment book be made GDPR compliant. Condition 14, noise and nuisance and overlooking would only be exacerbated if this condition were removed. Can I ask members to reiterate their previous decision to protect residential amenity and reject the removal and variation of conditions 2, 4, 5 and 14.
Thank you, Councillor Webb. We didn't have a timer and let you get on a bit more than you should have done. Right. Ian, would you like to come back on any of this now before Roy jumps in again?
Thank you, Chair. No, I mean, the report does spell out that the policy test under GD5 is unacceptable harm. We have to make a judgment as to whether or not we feel that these variations are moving towards that level of harm, and it is clearly a judgment call. I mean, members made their feelings well known with the original application, so it is a judgment call, and I would say it is finely balanced, and it is something that I am mindful of. It's a residential area, and clearly there have been comments and strong opinions voiced by local residents. Carl's here tonight as well if you wanted to ask him about any of the environmental protection side of things. One thing that Councillor Webb did mention, of course, was that the situation is being twin-tracked with an appeal to the Planning Inspectorate. Now, that appeal, I understand, was lodged in early November. The Inspectorate have written to the applicant asking for more information, and they've got until the latter part of January to provide it. So if they were to go and to complete the necessary appeal documents, then that would also be exercised by way of an appeal. But clearly it's for members to decide whether or not they feel that the changes and the variations to the conditions before you tonight are acceptable or not. If you feel not, then they would revert back to the conditions that are in place under the extant permission. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Did you have anything to add to this?
Thank you, Chair. Nothing specifically, really. I mean, I can present. It may be helpful to the committee to present sort of the information that we've received as a department in our remit as response to complaints about noise. I don't know if that would be helpful, but we've, you know, in terms of our representations on the application, we're, you know, it is finely balanced. I think it's probably a good way to put it. As far as unacceptable harm, it is obviously semantics in many respects in terms of what you determine unacceptable harm in terms of where that threshold is met. We obviously did have concerns at the original application stage. I think the conditions that were applied were proportionate and reasonable at that time, and so you could argue that changing them means that we're changing the threshold in terms of what we felt was proportionate and reasonable at that time. The only thing I'd say probably where we've come down in terms of our position is probably does relate to the complaint situation. We've been contacted in total by 3 different households complaining about issues in relation to the operation. They all related to the operations prior to the application coming in, which I think probably at the time instigated the application to come in retrospectively. And the only other contact we've had from complainants was around the time of the planning hearing, where we were sent some recordings that had been made on a phone by one of the residents. And the extent of the noise that was heard. And I think it's important to probably highlight in terms of our involvement, amenity obviously is a broader determination under planning than it is necessarily under nuisance that we deal with when we're dealing with complaints under the Environmental Protection Act. When we're talking about nuisance, we're in this case dealing specifically with noise and solely with noise. And so that kind of broader picture within the planning determination is arguably different to that. But on those recordings, focusing specifically on noise and nuisance, our determination was that they were not particularly excessive. The recordings only exhibited conversations, so it was conversations that were taking place out the front of the house, like anyone would have with anyone out the front of their dwelling. So they were in keeping with a normal domestic setting, notwithstanding that the frequency of those conversations out the front of the house might be higher because of the nature of the business. We've not received any evidence or suggestion that things like the hairdryers and the actual operations themselves are excessive in terms of noise specifically. And so that's really where we've kind of brought our judgment. And like I say, it's been operating now for several months, and we've had no contact since July from any complainants suggesting that this is impacting their livelihoods and their properties. So that's kind of where our advice came from in terms of the planning application.
Thank you very much, members of the committee. Councillor Potter.
Thanks, Chair. Well, we've heard from Councillor Webb, and we've heard from two residents quite eloquently who put their arguments forward on the effects and the trauma and the harm allegedly caused by this applicant and the development. We have the applicant and her supporters' opinions, and we have the conflict with residents. So how should we give weight to either side's arguments? It is a judgment call, we know that, but surely residents who have lived in peace and quiet of a residential area should be allowed to continue to live in peace and quiet of a residential area. We know the applicant, as a business person, carried out considerable alterations to a domestic property, turning it into a business property, yet failed to seek advice, as Councillor Webb has said, to the City Council Planning Department. If she had had this forethought, then this probably wouldn't have taken place, this hearing, because she would have been given advice. That didn't happen. So the question is, it's come again for retrospective planning permission. And the committee at that time felt that the conditions that we imposed were proportionate, legitimate, and necessary. I still believe that those conditions are still proportionate, legitimate, and necessary. And from what we've heard tonight, I think the judgment call is still not to vary the conditions, not to remove the conditions, but have the conditions remain in force. I would also like to say that one of the things the applicant said initially was that her customers would be walking to the salon. Well, if she's keeping an appointment book like she was asked to do, that would surely justify whether that's true or not. We, as you know, we went on a site visit and we saw one vehicle park on that parking provision, which was, well, the parking provision was only there because the applicant removed, or somebody from the applicant removed a neighbour's foliage hedge. That's what gave them that parking provision. And we saw one vehicle park on that parking provision, and the overhang on the pavement was some 18 inches, which meant that pedestrians would have to walk off the pavement onto the road to get round that vehicle. Now that surely is a public safety issue. So I just think that we continue with the 12-month condition with the existing conditions that are proportionate, legitimate and necessary, and we see how the applicant actually adheres to those conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Potter. Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Chair. Very much on the same vein. We all remember this application when it was first presented, and we spent a lot of time thinking about how to condition that application for the benefit of the residents and their amenity. I think that we came up with sensible proposals for conditions, and I would strongly go against removing them or varying them. And I would remind the Chair that at the last meeting you said we're not scared of appeals.
And we still aren't, Councillor Jennings. Thank you very much. Councillor Nawaz.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just, as everybody knows, we went for a site visit to this place and we've seen what it was like, and still the application is back. I just totally agree with what Councillor Potter has said. You know, let's go for the 12 months and see how the business lady does, and then we can go from there. Other than just changing, we will have applications keep coming back. Are we going to still go with them? You know, other applications, you know, we have HMOs applications coming back. We don't want to keep applications keep coming back. We'd rather we've gave them a 12 months conditions. Let's go for that, and from there on we'll see next year what happens. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Nawaz. Councillor Kerr.
I also think this is a really difficult situation, because we want to encourage small businesses, we want to encourage jobs, but they ought to be in the right places. And if this is a successful venture, and let's hope it is, it shouldn't be continuing in this location. And I think that's really the reason why we've put the limitations on it and why we've got the 12-month limit. If something like this ticks over with 3 or 4 people coming a day during daytime hours, it's probably something that the area can live with. But if it turns out to be 10 people every day, and it's from 9 in the morning until 7 at night, and it's up to 5 days a week, then it shouldn't be here. It should be somewhere else. It should be somewhere where those sorts of comings and goings are more appropriate. And I think that's what the conditions that we originally applied were aiming to judge. And I think even after the 12 months, I think we will still need to be making that judgment. And it may be that we'll need to work with the applicant to find out which parts of the week are actually the bits that she wants to keep, and be able to continue working but not all the time, or whether it's less than that. And this is the way of judging that. So the changes that are being proposed here are a tweaking of the hours. I think we need to consider, Chair, as to whether we want to allow the extension of hours in the evening, which is what officers are proposing, and taking away Mondays. Is that what we think is right, or is that not? I certainly think we need to continue to have the side window properly obscured, if officers don't think it's properly obscured at the moment, and not opening. And we certainly need to have a limit on the permitted time that it can be used. We don't want to extend that. So I think the only thing that we're really debating, Chair, is the hours, as to whether we allow a bit of flexibility, which is what's being asked for, or whether we stick to what we originally said and it all finishes at 5 o'clock. And personally, I think it's a total limit on the hours. Find out whether this is a viable business and make sure we maintain it as a small business after it's had its trial period. Or it can be a flourishing business but somewhere else.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. Anybody else? Councillor Prosser.
So it's been said twice already today, this is a retrospective application, which it clearly isn't. This is an application to change the conditions that were granted last time. So that probably needs clarifying. Also, the application time limit, the temporary nature of this application makes it very difficult for the applicant. And the application has to be some point permanent. We cannot keep it temporary indefinitely. I don't think the planning inspectorate would enjoy that situation, and we need to have a clear route for how the temporary provision of the application is actually finally removed at some point. As for timings, I said in the initial application In this kind of business, it's very important that people get the opportunity to have their hair cut later on for events, weddings, situations. It suits a lot of people, particularly people who are working, so they can get their hair done in the evening. It suits the business, and being a quiet business, it will not affect the amenity of the area beyond anything other than a normal conversation in the street, which in a street like that should be quite common. Also, I was quite surprised that Condition 5 says that a record of appointments need to be kept and made available for council staff to view. I think this is quite an onerous condition. I don't think it's fair on the applicant. I don't think it's fair on the business. She's either allowed to run a hairdresser's or she's not. And limiting the appointments to 15-minute gaps between appointments, an appointment book that she has to keep and that is auditable by the council, is a very onerous condition in my opinion. It would be interesting to see what the inspectorate says on that one. As for the side window, I think she's done a good job in making sure that's not accessed. I don't know if there's any other ventilation required in the building, or maybe required, but again, I don't see that it's that much of an issue as it's obscured, and I'm sure that the fence or a hedge is between the two properties, so I don't think it's going to affect the neighbours that much. That's my opinion. But so I would like to see us be a bit more flexible rather than just hammer it on, make her life very difficult. This is not a high impact business. I've seen doctor's surgeries run from garages. I've seen vet surgeries run from garages in very extreme locations, and work perfectly well. You know, businesses were always in with houses, and for good reason. So I don't think it's affecting that much. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Prosser. Anybody else? Well, look, I don't know if some of you have been on this committee for any longer than 6 years. Certainly Lucy and Mike and myself have been there. But what I've seen is a trend of people making applications, getting them, then coming back and asking for variations. That makes a mockery of this committee. I mean, it's only a few months ago that we debated 45 minutes on this issue, having visited the premises, having assurances from the proprietor, and we came to a decision whereby we didn't choose the objectors or the applicants. We came to a decision that was based on a 45-minute debate and was seen to be fair. Now, for somebody to come back a few months later and not only seek sort of a variation of conditions, call it or retrospective, whichever way you look at it, but also say, well, I've appealed as well. Well, in that case, let her appeal and see, you know, what happens there. What is this doing before us if she's going to appeal anyway? And in my mind, we have to be, you know, as a committee, strong in what we believe. For if it was our decision 3-4 months ago, after 45 minutes debate and visiting the site, looking at everything, reading through the documents, and we put these conditions on, they should be adhered to for the time limit that was set. It's too much of a loophole for everybody to now, for applicants, whether they be individuals or developers, to come back to us a few months later and say, look, can we vary this condition? Can we vary? No. The conditions we set should be adhered to, and the time limit that we set should be adhered to. If she wants to come back when this time limit expires and seek variation of condition on the basis that she's run this business satisfactorily without any complaints from neighbors or any, you know, other sort of residents of that street, then fine, we'll look at it as we do with all applications sympathetically, because we don't want to discourage small businesses. I you know, own a post office, so I know how difficult it is to make a living these days. But equally, we cannot and we should not make a mockery of this committee's decision for people to come back every 3-4 months, seek variations, because we will open the floodgates. People will come to us with HMOs, with takeaways, off license, etc. we had a similar situation not a few months back when there was somebody applied for 13 apartments and eventually, got 15 or 16, and we had to approve it then because of Section 106 that, we made agreements with them. So in my opinion, and this is purely my opinion, I'm not trying to influence anybody, I think the conditions that were put there were fair, reasonable, and the length of time was reasonable. Now, if anybody doesn't want to add anything like that, would somebody like to move it to the vote? So are we voting now to refuse this?
No, with the recommendation as printed, Chair, first.
Sorry, okay, all those in agreement with the recommendation as printed?
Let me just clarify, Chair, whether that's a variation and removal of conditions or the continuing of the conditions.
The conditions to be varied are on page 8. The specific wording are on page 8. The other conditions on the extant permission aren't in the scope of this application. It's just those 4 conditions before you. So if you feel that those variations are acceptable, that they are in there, fully printed, and so that's the basis of the recommendation, Chair. The other conditions, of course, sit happily as is.
Anybody, sorry, Mr. Kerr.
Can I propose that we support as printed on page 8, we support condition 2, which will extend the 12-month period to this time next year, which means it gives us a bit more time to find out whether or not we think this actually works. That we continue to support condition 5, which says we continue to keep a record of the appointments, because I don't think it's very arduous to write down on a book whether you've got somebody coming in today or not. And it may be she does it electronically, in which case it's part of a spreadsheet and she can get rid of the GDPR sensitive areas from that spreadsheet very easily. And condition 14, which says that we need to keep the window closed and obscurely glazed. I don't think there's anything contentious about those, and I think that probably the majority of committee will support that without an issue. The only question I have, Chair, is condition 5, which is the opening hours. I'd be very happy to have a nice quiet Monday, and I can recognise that she, as a business, she might want to explore how much business there actually is in the evenings. And if we tell her she's allowed 1 or 2 evenings, and it may be 1 or 2 evenings, which is what's proposal here, I think, is 2 evenings, then that is fine. Oh, it's condition 4, sorry. Condition 4. Then I think that's okay, because that will give her the opportunity to find out if that's actually where she wants to use somebody else's salon, not here, but enable people to book those times somewhere else. And if that's what she needs to do, then I'm fine with that, and we can make a decision and say, right, you can only have the 9 to 5. Other times, you can book something somewhere else. But alternatively, there is space elsewhere in other salons, and if she has customers who say, well, I really, really want you to do my hair, and I want it done on a Friday evening because of this reason, I'm going out that night, then she can book some space in a different salon. Because there are lots of salons with space who probably she could book a chair, because that's what happens in salons.
Chair.
So fixed until 7 o'clock is fine as well. 6 until 5 o'clock is fine.
Yes, I was just about to say Lucy's confused everybody here now. I don't know what we're voting on.
I think probably the easiest way of dealing with this is to actually first of all take a vote on the recommendation, which is to effectively accept all changes to all the conditions. If that's approved, then that's the end of the matter. If that's refused, then we can go on and consider each individual condition. I think that's probably might be the clearest way of dealing with the matter. Right.
Councillor Jennings, did you want to say anything?
I did actually, Chair. I think Councillor Kerr's making it up as she goes along, and it's quite amusing. Well, it's quite obvious what we've got to vote on. We're either sticking with what we agreed 3 or 4 months ago, or we're not. Simple.
Councillor Potter.
Thanks, Chair. Could I second that? We either vote
to keep the conditions as they are or vary them. It's quite simple.
Right, okay then. Well, which basically means that the question I have to ask you is, are you voting for the recommendation which states removal of some of the conditions? Are you voting against the recommendation then? All those voting against the recommendation? That recommendation is refused. Now that Mr. Teasdale, it's your job to come up with something.
Well,
No, I think we're finished.
Yeah.
That's it.
okay. Are you clear on that?
Yeah, I'm clear.
Well, I'd been told by the legal people, so what is it that you'd want then, Councillor Carr?
What are we doing in relation to the current appeal?
Well, the current bill is running.
Yeah, but officers will be
Yeah.
representing. Yeah. My apologies again. There is, as you've already heard, an appeal against those conditions, and those conditions were suggested by officers. So officers will be representing the council in relation to that appeal in any event, because they were conditions recommended by officers. So we don't necessarily need a member to represent on the matter.
Which is what I thought, that we're merely sort of sticking to what we said a few months back and sort of turning down the variance application. So I think that's the end of it, Mike.
And just to clarify, the reasons for refusal are already set out in the original conditions anyway, sort of in terms of the justification for those conditions.
Yeah, well, obviously Ian can liaise with myself and Lucy, but from what we heard tonight, I think the additional information is that those rules haven't been adhered to, the initial ones.
Yeah, I mean, we will just issue a decision on this application, and the reason will be obviously the impact on residential amenities. So that will be dispatched, and then, as Stephen suggested, the appeal, if the appellant submits the right information by the 23rd of January, I think it is, we will contest that by way of local hearing, is what she's asked for.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I think they want to leave. Okay, going on to the other item, pages 12 to 19. Laura's going to tell us about this. There's been some late developments in this.
Thank you, Chair. This application relates to Units D and E on Kingsway Park Close. Permission is sought to change the use of the western half of the building from storage and distribution to retail, creating a retail unit. The change of use has already taken place and is currently occupied by Trusty Pet Supplies Limited. Therefore, the description of the proposal needs amending to state retention of. As members will be aware, additional information has been circulated this week, which provided further justification in relation to the proposal's compliance with policies CP10 and CP13. The additional information has considered viability and provides further information about the vacant units on the Kingsway Retail Park. The applicant has confirmed that these units are not readily available to them and are not of an acceptable size and design and layout, and therefore do not meet their needs. The applicant has not previously shared this information with the local authority, and therefore is not considered within the committee report. As such, we are now in receipt of updated comments from planning policy colleagues who no longer support a reason for refusal on sequential test grounds and do not consider the application to be contrary to policies CP10 and CP13. Members will be aware that we apportion great weight to an application satisfying the retail sequential test, and we would not amend a recommendation without acceptable or robust justification for doing so. We consider that a proposal cannot be reasonably accommodated within a sequentially preferable location, and the application, as updated, would address the policy issues previously raised and protect the Council's retail strategy as set out within your report. Other matters to be considered relate to highways, access and land drainage. Car parking and access is located at the front of the unit and is acceptable in highways terms. The full comments of highway colleagues and their recommended conditions are set out on page 13 of your report. Councillor Kerr has previously raised concerns with regards to pedestrian access, and this matter will be discussed with highways colleagues and weaved into suggested conditions where supported by the Highways Authority. No objections have been sustained from colleagues in land drainage, subject to recommendations of the flood risk assessment being observed. And in light of the further justification provided by the applicant, this application can now be supported subject to conditions. Given the updated policy comments being received today, there has been no opportunity to draft recommended conditions. Therefore, the updated recommendation is to grant planning permission with conditions which have been previously agreed with the Chair and Vice Chair. The application has been requested to be brought to committee by Councillor Pegg, and you have a speaker. However, as the recommendation has been changed, we wouldn't normally allow them to speak. Is it your discretion? Thank you.
Well, I think it's probably right that at least for this year we should stick to our prep and not allow the speaker on this issue. Councillor Carr, did you want to say anything?
I'm extremely pleased with what's happened here, because on one of the very few occasions where I was prepared to dispute officers' recommendations was I think this was a good application. I'm very pleased that where we finished up. Thank you, Chair.
Well, if you've said it, Mike, we don't go against you. Lucy.
Something more about my concerns in terms of how accessible this is. And if we could move on to the next plan, that one shows it excellently. My concern is that we try to ensure that retail locations are accessible by people who aren't driving by car, in their cars. And there's a lot of discussion in the highways comments about accessibility, and there's the bike stall provided. But there's actually no discussion that I noticed about accessibility for cycles. When this area was constructed, it was constructed with the expectation that it would be for commercial uses and not retail uses. And therefore, the pavement on both sides of the access coming down from Brackensdale Avenue is cut by curbed crossings, and we can see one of them in the plan that's shown above us there. So that you come down from Brackensdale Avenue from that top left-hand corner of the plan, and you come to a crossing point, which means that somebody with their pushchair or with their wheeled bag to be able to carry something a bit heavier back with them has got to negotiate that crossing. The other side of the road is actually even worse, and the pavement there has longer crosses and more of them. You then get to the car park, and the car park layout, the pavement doesn't reach into the car park. The car park layout is very car dominated, and my ideal would be to expect the applicant to be able to work with the Highway Authority to change the nature of the crossing at the top left-hand corner of the drawing and to make that a continuous footway, and to introduce a new gate on the side so that pedestrians could walk in effectively where the bike store is now, and the bike store would need to be slightly relocated so that people could walk across the front of the store and have no conflict with the cars who may be driving in and out, or the loading bay. I don't know how that can be managed within planning, but I would very much hope that committee would enable that to be happened by conditions to be agreed.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes.
I just want to say I support the planning officer's revised recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Prosser.
Yeah, so I mean, looking at that estate, although it was built as an industrial estate, it's quite interesting to notice Hickory Dickory's playhouse next door, obviously aimed at children and full of children during the week, and the climbing centre as well on the other side. So it clearly hasn't worked out very well as an industrial area, and this seems like a really good use of these buildings. The access point just mentioned there does already have drop curbs and a locked gate, so while a pavement across there might be ideal and an improvement, there is already reasonably good pedestrian access or disabled access along that pavement at that point. So yeah, I support this application.
Thank you, Councillor Prosser. Laura, did you want to sort of add, or rather allay Lucy's fears in any way? Can we talk to them about the payment?
We can, as I've sort of stated, we'll have a discussion with Highways and we'll also have a discussion with the applicant. I'm sure there'll be pre-commencement conditions that we'll need to agree with the applicant as well. So we'll have a discussion with them and see what we can achieve, taking into consideration Councillor Kerr's concerns.
Okay, thank you. Well, the recommendation is for approval. All those in favour of it? That's carried by a slim margin.
Thank you, Chair. The first item is the Derby Engineers Club 214 Osmaston Road. The proposal is part demolition and erection of a side two-storey extension and change of use from social club to 8 apartments plus 24 apartments in 3 blocks with landscaping and car parking. It's visible from the public domain. That's the proposal.
Actually, I think this should be looked at, and I'd certainly want to have a look at it because of the number of apartments, and I'd like to see what sort of parking spaces they're creating for. So from my point of view, I think I'd like to go and see it. Councillor Navar's at the back there would like to see it, and anybody, Councillor Kerr. So we should go for a site visit. Councillor Jennings there as well. I think we ought to quit while we're ahead on this, right? Yeah.
Would you like me to circulate the details as well so you can see them? I'll ping you a link to the application so you can have a look as well.
Yes, but if possible, then I'd like to have an officer there on site to look at it.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. Second item is Pectron, Alfreton Road, top end of the city. It's a manufacturing and warehouse unit, if you're interested, right on the knuckle over the railway bridge there.
We'll give that a miss.
Number 3 is the Reserve Matters Phase 2 for the Smart Park development down at the former Salanese site. It's in the top right corner of the site, so it abuts the Midland main line. It's for a large unit with surface car parking.
No takers on that?
No takers, thank you. And finally, this is a public sector infrastructure application. Now, I'm sure you'll all be aware that in August this was a new type of application that was introduced by the government where we have a quicker determination time. So it's on the agenda potentially for the next meeting in January because we have to make a decision within 10 weeks. And if we don't, we have to notify the casework unit as to why we haven't made a decision. So it's It's up at the Kingsway Hospital site. It's a mental health facility, and Sarah John, who's the case officer, is trying to quickly assimilate all the consultation responses because we've got a quick decision time to accommodate here. So it may be at the January meeting anyway. But if you want to have a walk up there, I'm sure you can see most of it from the public zone. I wouldn't possibly comment, Councillor Potter.
Okay. Thank you, Ian. Before we all sort of go and do what we have to, I'd just like to say that, I mean, this is obviously the last meeting of this year. And, you know, tonight we've shown a bit of solidarity with each other, as Lucy and I think most people have said, this is a non-political regulatory committee. So we're all here to look after the interests of the citizens of Derby, as I've said on many occasions. And I think we have to be strong as a committee and stop sort of these backdoor variances and retrospective planning. The officers put a great deal of time in. We put our time in going to site visits, etc., then debating issues here, putting conditions on. And what we don't want to see is for them to come back 3 months later and say, well, can we vary this, can we add that? That should not be the case, and we should make it quite clear to them that we're not going to entertain any of this, right? Because it's a complete waste of officers' time, and it makes a mockery of our decision-making as well, that the fact that 3 months later we have to overturn what we did 3 months ago. You know, it's just not right. And I hope we're all strong enough to resist all these temptations that are being put our way and, you know, hopefully, as I said, stick to looking after the interests of the city of Derby. That's all I would like to say, apart from the fact that I'd like to wish you all Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and I hope you all have a happy family reunions. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen in the new year with, you know, could possibly have more situations of tightening of rules and lockdown, but thank you anyway for this year for putting up with me, and if I've offended anybody, it was quite intentional. Thank you very much. Enjoy yourself. Good night.
And thank you, Chair, and a Merry Christmas to you.
Thank you.